Good evening. More now on the news that broke just minutes ago, and the controversy almost sure to be erupting even as we speak over the Russia investigation and two competing memos about key parts of it from the House Intelligence Committee. The Republican version is out there already, as you know, President Trump releasing it over objections from the FBI and others. Well, now, after several days considering the Democratic rebuttal, the president has decided not to make it public. The latest now from CNN's Jim Acosta standing by at the White House. So, Jim, explain this.
Well, I think a lot of people want some explaining when it comes to this decision, Anderson. All week long, there was the expectation that the president, in the issue of transparency, remember officials were saying over here, we're going to put this memo through the same, rigorous vetting process that we put the Nunes memo through. And the suggestion all along is that in the issue of transparency, that they would go ahead and release this memo. But of course, President Trump is the final decider on this, and he made this decision, it sounds, late today to go ahead and make this decision not to declassify this memo from the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. There is a letter that is attached to the statement that came from the White House press office about this. We can put it up on screen. It's from the White House counsel. If we don't have that graphic available, I can just read this key paragraph to you. It essentially says, although the president is inclined to declassify the memorandum because the memorandum contains numerous properly classified and especially sensitive passages, he is unable to do so at this time. And it goes on to say, Anderson, however, given the public interest and transparency in these circumstances, the president has directed the Justice Department, and I'll continue to paraphrase here, to work with the House Intelligence Committee to come up with a version that is going to satisfy officials over here. Now, we should point out earlier today the president met with the FBI director, a top Justice Department official, the White House counsel's office about all of this, and apparently that is where this decision was made. There is another letter here attached to all of this, Anderson, from the White House counsel, Don McGahn. This is to Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General. Obviously, we've been talking about Rod Rosenstein quite a bit, and the FBI Director, Chris Wray. It is directing the Justice Department to go and work with the House Intelligence Committee Democrats to come up with a more suitable alternative. And it mentions in this letter, enclosed in this, you'll find a version of the document that identifies in highlighted text some of the information that they consider to be too sensitive to release this evening. Now, Anderson, I can't just report all of that and be, hey, that's it, end of story, because obviously you're going to have some political considerations here. One is the Republican memo, the Devin Nunes memo, was essentially released almost unredacted with very few accommodations, we're told, to the intelligence community. And that memo alleged all of these abuses on the part of the FBI, on the part of federal investigators investigating Trump campaign contacts with the Russians during the 2016 campaign. The Schiff memo, as we've been reporting all along, was supposed to be a rebuttal and was going to go through 10 pages, point by point, outlining and describing why there are flaws in this Nunes memo. You're going to have Democrats, Anderson, and I'm sure we're all crashing the phones right now to get them on TV, who are going to say it's not the classified sensitive material in this Schiff memo that concerns the White House, it's the rebuttal, and that they did not want this issue out there at this time. But Anderson, this obviously came on a day when there was no briefing. There was only one opportunity to talk to the president today. He was asked about the Rob Porter saga over here. In this memo, he came up very briefly at the end. He said, we're going to be issuing a letter. That was the first inkling we had that this decision was coming down. But obviously, this is pretty explosive stuff, and you're going to have Republicans and Democrats fighting over this for the next several days, perhaps weeks, while this process is going on up on Capitol Hill. The Justice Department working with House Democrats to get their version out there.
Jim, the president had 5 days to make this decision. Is this the end of that 5 day? I mean, did this decision, did it have to be tonight that they made this announcement?
Yeah, this is essentially the end of the 5 day period. It could have gone into Saturday, I think, but this is really the end of that 5 day period. And what they were telling us all week long was that we were going to subject this process for vetting the Schiff memo the same way that we vetted and processed the Nunes memo. And of course, Anderson, we would be remiss if we didn't point out, the president said at the State of the Union speech to a lawmaker, 100% we're going to release this memo. That was before he even had read the Nunes memo. That was before the vetting process was undertaken with respect to vetting and processing that Nunes memo. And so the writing was really on the wall all along. Conversely, Anderson, I think all this week the writing was on the wall that the president was probably not going to release this memo. I know that there were White House officials saying, well, unless there are big problems with it, we're probably going to put it out there. Knowing this president, having covered him for a long time, I just cannot imagine this president declassifying and releasing something of this nature that was going to essentially call into question a memo that he was heralding. Remember, he was heralding it a week ago as vindication that the Russian investigation is a witch hunt and a hoax. He felt because of the release of the Nunes memo. To think that he would go ahead and release the Schiff memo or declassify the release of the Schiff memo and undo all of that, to me, just seemed out of character for him, Anderson.
Yeah. Jim Acosta, appreciate the reporting. Our legal and political team, Ann Milgram is here, Jeffrey Toobin, Josh Campbell, and Evan Perez. Ann, what's your initial take on this? Are you surprised?
So I'm not surprised. I mean, I think all of us had a sense that this might be coming, that the president might refuse to declassify the memo. Keep in mind also that the first memo was 3.5 pages, incredibly conclusory, virtually no facts.
Right. The FBI, Chris Wray, said that essentially they omitted all these facts that changed the actual timeline and meaning.
Exactly. And so I think, there was a challenge with the idea of the Intelligence Committee having anything declassified and going out that could reveal sources or methods that the intelligence community uses. But beyond that, there really wasn't anything in there that raised concerns. The thing we do know about the Democratic memo is that it's far more lengthy, and from public statements, it's pretty easy to surmise that it's going to have a lot more facts and be a lot more detailed. Now, the real question is what we don't have when you look at this letter that has been sent essentially from Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray, the head of the FBI, to the House committee. What we don't have is, it says, the areas with the red blocks are the ones we're worried about. Right. You and I and Jeff are not seeing that. So there's a real question of, are there 3 red blocks or are there 300?
Right. Jeff?
This letter is a letter, but it's really more of a hand gesture to the Democrats, the one that's inappropriate to make on television. I mean, it is basically, I have the power to censor your argument, and that's what I'm going to do. I mean, I think it's important, we sort of wear ourselves out talking about Donald Trump and, the departures from the norms of behavior. This is a dispute between two sides about the propriety of the FBI's behavior. We've heard one side. Any fair system, you allow people to hear both sides. So instead of allowing people to hear both sides, they have essentially sort of kicked this thing down the road to a point when, they know the news cycle the way we know the news cycle. By the time this thing gets released in some form or another, we'll be on to, the circus will have moved on. So basically what this is doing is making sure that the only substantive argument in front of the public about the FBI's behavior in this circumstance is the one from the Republicans. And it's shocking.
Which, I got to say, was the exact argument that the Democrats made when the Republicans voted unanimously to release the Republican memo, but not to let the Democrats release theirs at the same time.
Correct. And, fortunately for the Democrats, the Nunes memo was so pathetically bad that it almost refuted itself. But, we still believe in a system where both sides get a voice, and this says we're not even going to let you talk, much less
being alleged that somehow the FBI did something wrong. That's a proper venue for having such discussions, not to have, be going tit for tat with different memos.
Josh, though, once you've gone down the road, though, of releasing one memo, which the FBI asked the White House not to do, the White House went ahead anyway, and the FBI made the rare public statement saying, I don't want to misquote Chris Wray, but essentially saying that there were material omissions of fact.
No, you're right. And again, I was not a fan of the GOP memo. In fact, I think it was atrocious that you would release this type of information, selectively cherry-picking information. But still, as a former national security practitioner, I don't think that gives us the green light to go ahead and say, well, here is some additional information that we're going to provide. Again, I understand the political considerations, but I just think the proper venue is in a classified setting when you're dealing with this type of sensitive information.
Evan, what's the latest you're hearing about how the decision is being received and what's next?
Look, I think, Anderson, part of the problem with this entire fight is that it's kind of exposing the fact that, for our legislators, members of Congress, who are responsible for writing the laws governing, FISA and how the FBI, uses the law, it's shown that they really don't understand how the FBI does this. So these are the guys that just recently reauthorized a section of the FISA law, 702, and it's clear from their complaints about how the FBI handled the Carter Page surveillance that they really have no idea how the law works, how the FBI, the power that the FBI has. And so that's where a lot of the misunderstanding is coming. And so, look, I do think that Josh is right, that inside the FBI, they didn't want either memo released, and they certainly don't want a 10-page memo if they didn't want the 3-page version being released. So I think this is a genuine concern from Rod Rosenstein, from Chris Wray. I think we should not ignore that. And even though there's a lot of politics flying around, the truth is that there was grave harm that was done by the release of the Republican memo. Even though it was a dud, there was information that really never gets released. And it was, we identified a source for the FBI. We identified that someone was a target. I mean, this is stuff that is not supposed to get released, and it was. So I get the politics, but more harm would have probably been done, according to the FBI, if this 10-page version were released.
I want to bring into the conversation Van Jones, also, and Scott Jennings. Van, in this letter from Rosenstein, it essentially says, look, the Democrats can rewrite this with help from the FBI once people talk about, once the kind of FBI and the national security system weighs in. What's wrong with that?
First of all, a short lie sometimes requires a long rebuttal. The problem you have is the first memo should have never come out in the first place. It had all kind of innuendo. It created a sense of real unease and suspicion over the FBI. It was a couple of pages. You can do a lot of damage in a couple of pages. The idea that now you want to be able to respond and you can't, you're moving in the direction of a one-party state. That's the problem, is that we have right now one-party rule in Washington, D.C. The Republicans control everything. But we've always had the idea that even so, the minority had certain rights. The minority had certain privileges, because tomorrow you might be in the minority. So the sense of this back and forth, that has now been flushed down the toilet. And what's left now, hanging out there, are some of the worst allegations against the FBI, that they're corrupt at the top, and that and stuff was put out there over the objections of our national security community. This is a very dangerous moment. I'm not one of these people who runs around with my hair on fire every day about every tweet, about every little thing or whatever. I try to give these guys a lot of room, because honestly, I just don't have the emotional fortitude to be this upset every day.
Right. By the way, your hair burned off a little.
Exactly. Exactly. My hair's long since burned off. Now I just national security. This is a very bad day for America.
Scott, do you share Van's concerns?
I thought from the beginning, if you're going to release one, you should release both.
And you said that.
And so now here we are with the second memo not being released tonight, but with the president clearly saying he's inclined to release it, and they're going to send it back and ensure what you just said, that they're not jeopardizing any sources and methods or anything that would hurt our security people, our intelligence people. That's the responsible thing to do. It's clearly a longer document than the first memo. And so my suspicion is they're going to send it back, try to take care of some of that information, and then the president will follow through on what he said.
Isn't that something they could have done over the last 5 days?
Well, I don't know. None of us have seen the memo. We don't know how technical the information is that's in the memo. I know this. I think it's better to measure twice and cut once on something like this. And so sending it back to the committee and letting the FBI take a look at it seems to me to be prudent, particularly when you consider the White House is saying they do want to release it. They just want to make sure it's right and not jeopardizing anything before they do.
Jen Psaki, I understand what Scott's saying. Talk about being prudent, though. It would have been prudent for them to have heeded the FBI warning on the first memo, which they did not.
That's right. And I think we should stop pretending that this is on the level. The Department of Justice expressed serious concerns about the content and the accuracy of the first memo. They have not done that about the Democratic memo. So this is simply a case of President Trump wanting to punt it, not wanting to put it out. I don't think there's any reality based fact here that he wants to actually, or he's open to putting this out. Otherwise, he would just have released it, because DOJ has not expressed any concerns, and it's not about that. It's about politics.
Van?
You know, the other thing that I think is very ironic here tonight, of all the nights for us to be talking, this president is so concerned about national security, making sure that no bad information gets out there. But we just learned that there are 30 people or more working in the White House tonight who have access to all this stuff who have not been cleared by the FBI. So you literally have a White House full of people who really shouldn't even be allowed to come in as visitors with their kids on the weekend, who can see all this stuff. And the American people can't, even though the ranking member of the Democratic Party is trying to put it out there. This is why, listen, I would love to give the benefit of the doubt on this one. And I have night after night, and the liberals hate me for it. But tonight, you can't honestly, in good faith, give this guy the benefit of the doubt.
Josh Campbell, just as someone who, was with the FBI, I think, for, 11, 12 years, how long does the process of looking at this for sources and methods? I mean, they say that the Democrats, they can go back and work with the Democrats on kind of, purging whatever is for national security reasons shouldn't be in this. How long does that take? And was the last 5 days not long enough for that?
I think we're in a whole new world here, because this is not what we do. We don't release information like this selectively. So I don't know if we can compare it to any type of standard, because I don't think there is a standard. What I do think is this does a disservice to the American people. If you look at the right way to conduct an investigation and the wrong way to conduct an investigation, I think you only need to compare what former Director Mueller is doing and what the House Intelligence Committee is doing. As the House Intelligence Committee slowly releases information, and I don't care what side you're on, it does the public a disservice because they don't see the full picture. It does them no good. Whereas you look at what Director Mueller is doing, no leaks. It's locked up, an all-star team, and they're going to wait until they reach a conclusion to release a fulsome picture for the American people. I think that's what the House Intelligence Committee should be doing right now.
Evan, can the House Intelligence Committee override the president on this? I mean, if the Republicans were on board?
Well, yeah, exactly. But again, if the Republicans were on board, and we're told, my colleagues Manu Raju and Jeremy Erb, who are covering this on the Hill, say that the Republicans aren't exactly eager to override the president on this. And I think, look, they have redactions. I guess, according to the letter that Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray have sent, they've identified specific parts of the memo that are problematic. So perhaps they can work through that. But at this point, I mean, I don't see Devin Nunes leading the charge to override President Trump. After all, Devin Nunes has been kind of playing almost like quarterback for President Trump on the Hill there.
Yeah. Everyone stick around. After a quick break, we're going to hear from a Democratic member of the Intelligence Committee. Later, the president's defense had fired White House Staff Secretary Rob Porter and his complete non-mention of the women who made serious abuse allegations against Porter. We're keeping him honest. It's an understatement to say there's a lot of breaking news tonight. There's new details of the cover-up by the White House of the Rob Porter abuse allegation scandal. And late tonight, word of another top White House departure over spousal abuse allegations. We'll have more on that shortly. Meantime, we continue this with this breaking news. The Democratic House Intelligence Committee memo, the rebuttal to the Republican version already out there, will not see the light of day, at least not in its present form. Joining us now, a Democratic member of the Intelligence Panel, Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. So, Congressman, do you believe, or I guess you do believe, this is obstruction of justice?
Good evening, Anderson. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona with Congressman Ruben Gallego. We're doing a millennial town hall, but I did want to address this. I do believe, I'm skeptical. The president has been consistent in this investigation only in his obstructive behavior. And so I have two questions about this. One, did he put any pressure on the Department of Justice in the redactions that they are seeking? And two, how do these redactions affect the broader context that is needed in the poisoning of the investigation that has occurred from the Republican memo? Now, I trust the department. I don't trust the president. So I'd like to hear from the DOJ on Tuesday before our committee. And I'm going to leave it to our ranking member, who has led us, I think, very, very well through this investigation to make those calls.
Your critics in the Republican Party have accused Democrats on the Intelligence Committee of purposely putting classified information or sources and methods into the memo that you knew the FBI and DOJ would object to. Is that what's happening?
Well, Anderson, we asked for something that the Republicans were not willing to do, which was for the DOJ to review it before it went to the public. So again, if the DOJ has legitimate concerns, we're not going to be a part of putting out to the public anything that would jeopardize sources and methods that the Republicans have not already jeopardized from their distorted memo. But if this is pressure from the president, we want to know that. And so I think it's only appropriate to bring the DOJ in, as was apparently alluded to in the letter that was sent over to us, that they'd be available to answer these questions.
What options do you really have from here on out?
Well, Anderson, if these are political edits, then it's really incumbent upon Devin Nunes to follow the lead that he set last week when he asked his colleagues to unanimously support releasing this memo to the public, but now to do it to the broader House of Representatives, the full House of Representatives. So if he is consistent that he wanted this out to the public and these edits are only political in nature, then he should come to the floor on Tuesday night and tell his colleagues that the public should see this for the sake of consistency and transparency.
Well, Congressman Swalwell, I appreciate your time. Back now with Jeffrey Toobin, Ann Milgram, Scott Jennings, Van Jones, as well as Scott Campbell, Evan Perez as well. In terms of the options the Democrats have, I mean, it's pretty limited. They basically just have to, if they want this memo out, they have to work with the Department of Justice and the FBI now.
It's not their candy store. I mean, the Republicans run the White House, the Republicans run the House of Representatives, and this is a subject to majority rule. But I think it is just worth pointing out that what the administration did when the Nunes memo came out, they said, FBI, we don't care what you think, we're releasing this. Today, when the Democrats have a memo that they want to come out, they say, well, the FBI thinks this is very important, so we can't release it. I mean, how stupid do we have to be to believe this nonsense? I mean, it's just
Scott,
outrageous.
does it not seem hypocritical to you?
Well, no, because so to make the allegation that there's not something in there that could just be released tonight, you don't know that.
But what about the Nunes memo? What about
the other memo? Was pretty short, and it didn't appear to me to be anything in there that was terribly, damaging or giving up sources and methods. This was a much longer memo. You don't know what's in there. None of us do. But isn't it prudent to let the FBI, I mean, you're upset on the one hand about the FBI being disregarded. Now they're being regarded. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
Well, you're the one who can't have it both ways. The point is, you either trust the FBI to decide what's classified or you don't. Okay, fine. This is classified. It can't be released. But they said that about the Nunes memo.
But the memo is going to, they said the president's inclined to release it when they make a few edits. That's it. That's all that's required here. When this comes out a week from today after they make the edits, then will that be satisfactory? Because I think that's what's going to happen.
So I'm of the view the memo has to come out, right? And I
agree.
I understand what Josh is saying about the FBI and the Homeland Security concerns, but having run law enforcement agencies, this is just fundamental fairness at this point. I think the question is what it looks like when it comes out. I expect that if it is heavily redacted, that we will hear the conversation will not end. So I personally think it would be incredibly foolish and would extend this a great deal if it is released in a way that they've taken everything out. That's the next fight, and it goes on and on. And so to me, if the president is serious about being willing to let the American public see both sides, and remember that first memo was not a consensus document. It was a really one-sided, conclusory piece of information. And so Van is right. It's going to take a lot more time and space to rebut those arguments.
Hey, Josh, was it you who said something about you wanted to get in?
Well, I would just say, Anderson, that, in this situation, we see the national security establishment with their interests aligned with a political party who, for whatever motive that they have, which maybe we'll find out later on, is selectively releasing information, deciding not to release other information. Again, it's a weird place to be in. Again, when as a national security professional, if you're aligned with that type of political operation, but I don't think that changes the fact that the information is sensitive and that there is a proper venue for its release.
I would like to say a word for transparency here. I mean, I know some people didn't want any memos to come out, but once one came out, both should come out. And at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of Americans who believe we can handle information, and we should be allowed to see inside and under the hood of these investigatory agencies so we can decide for ourselves what's going on here. I think transparency ultimately is not going to be judged to be a bad idea, no matter who is doing it.
But timing is so important in all these things. I mean, there was a story just came out, I think it was yesterday, about the incompetence of FEMA in Puerto Rico with all these contracts that they gave to some, companies that could not deliver food at all. Nobody pays attention to that because it's been months since people have moved on from that story. If the Democratic memo had come out at the same time as the Republican memo, it would have shifted the narrative, or at least the narrative would have been a more transparent one, a more accurate one. Look, if this comes out 2 weeks from now, who knows what, fresh outrage there's going to be that we're all paying attention to.
We are so far from where we should be. First of all, this shouldn't be taking place in the public eye at all in this way. We've never done this before. The idea that you would have a partisan memo come out basically trying to be this kind of...
This is not real oversight.
No, this is not real oversight. This is not real oversight where you say, look, we think there's something wrong. Here's the way to do it. If Nunes or any of these people thought something serious was going on, you don't need some bizarro 3-page press release, thrown out into the public. You need hearings. You need serious, spade work done to figure out if we've got a corrupt FBI.
Right. I mean, to be honest,
right, throw this thing out.
If the Republicans had been really concerned about the national security implications of when Chris Wray said he wanted FBI people to come and actually brief the committee, the Republicans said, no, we don't want that. I mean, if they were really concerned about national security implications, that would have been one way to do it. Coming up next, we have more breaking news. The president praising the top aide who departed in a storm of spousal abuse allegations, plus yet another staff departure also over spousal abuse allegations. Well, very big night of news. On top of the Intel Committee memo news, there's the Department of Justice official who would have overseen the Russia investigation if Rod Rosenstein is fired. And CNN has just learned about the departure of David Sorensen, a member of the Trump administration's speechwriting team. He stepped down after being accused of domestic abuse, so there's all of that, as well as reports that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly is willing to step down. We're keeping on us on that with what may turn out to be the precipitating factor behind his departure, if in fact he goes, and a simple statement of fact about it. Over the last 13 months, 3 separate women have revealed what they saw was abuse by Rob Porter, who until 2 days ago was a top White House aide. And during those 13 months, starting in January of 2017, when 2 of Porter's ex-wives spoke to the FBI, people knew about the allegations, including some top White House officials. They knew, and it seems they did nothing. Porter didn't only remain in his job, his star actually rose. He was promoted. He became Chief of Staff John Kelly's right-hand man, even handling highly classified material. And even when this became public, the first move by these powerful public servants was to defend Rob Porter. They circled the wagons around Rob Porter and they began singing his praises. When photos of Porter's first wife with a black eye were published, the White House began to change their tune, but they refused to go into details of who knew what and when. They dodged and they weaved and they tried to cover it up. Now, that was bad enough, but today it got worse. Today, the President of the United States weighed in. He said nothing about the women, nothing about spousal abuse. He didn't mention the women at all. No, what he did is he chose to praise Rob Porter.
It's a obviously tough time for him. He did a very good job when he was in the White House. And we hope he has a wonderful career, and hopefully he will have a great career ahead of him. But it was very sad when we heard about it, and certainly he's also very sad. Now, he also, as you probably know, he says he's innocent, and I think you have to remember that. He said very strongly yesterday that he's innocent. So you'll have to talk to him about that, but we absolutely wish him well.
We absolutely wish him well. Now, just to be clear, the president is saying that about a man accused of doing this to his first wife, Colby Holderness. He's talking about the man accused of verbally and emotionally abusing his second wife, Jenny Willoughby, and of menacing her to such a degree she had to get an order of protection.
After he did ultimately leave and I closed the door and locked it behind him, he returned a moment later and punched in the glass on the front door. And because I did know that his anger was unpredictable, I didn't know what he would do next, and
You were frightened?
I was scared.
It was after that that the police officer recommended she get a temporary order of protection. Now, the president did not mention her today, nor did he mention Rob Porter's more recent ex-girlfriend, also alleging abuse. Nor did John Kelly's memo to White House staffers last night or his public statement Wednesday night acknowledge any of Rob Porter's accusers. But what really stands out is the president's almost reflexive defense of an alleged abuser and total lack of consideration or even simple acknowledgement of the accusers and their allegations. And as stunning as that was to hear today, maybe it really shouldn't have been stunning, because this president has a history of doing for others what he did today for Rob Porter. This is what the president said, lamenting the departure from Fox News of alleged serial abuser Roger Ailes.
I think it's so sad. He's such a great guy. Roger is
I mean, what he's done on television is, in the history of television, he's got to be placed within the top 3 or 4 or 5, and that includes the founding of the major networks. So it's too bad.
He's talking about the history of television. Nothing about the women. He has similarly defended Bill O'Reilly and Mike Tyson. Nothing about the women. High praise, though, for the alleged predators. And according to reporting by the New York Times' Maggie Haberman, he's even tried to let himself off the hook for something he's caught on tape saying that we all heard, his boasting about being able to sexually assault women and get away with it because he's famous. She and Jonathan Martin reporting that he's told friends that that might not really be his voice on the Access Hollywood tape. The president, it turns out, is a remarkably understanding and forgiving guy when it comes to alleged abusers. Now, there are some exceptions, and you can draw your own conclusions about them. In the 90s, he took out full-page ads calling for a return of the death penalty, specifically for the 5 young black and Hispanic men accused of brutally sexually assaulting a jogger in New York Central Park, the Central Park 5. And even after these so-called Central Park 5 were exonerated after they spent years of their lives in prison, and exonerated, I should point out, by someone else's confession and actual DNA evidence, Mr. Trump has refused to change his belief in their guilt. There's also this tweet from 2012 talking about one of the more famously abusive celebrity relationships at the time. Quote, "If Rihanna is dating Chris Brown again, then she has a death wish. A beater is always a beater. Just watch." So there's that. But by and large, if you're a man accused of mistreating a woman, at least a white man, the President of the United States, he's quick to point out their claims of innocence.
Let me just tell you, Roy Moore denies it. That's all I can say. He denies it. And by the way, he totally denies it.
That's Roy Moore, alleged child molester and general mole creeper. Now, listen to what he said in the very next breath and just try to reconcile his two statements.
Mr. President, what is your message to women? This is a pivotal moment in our nation's history.
Women are very special. I think it's a very special time because a lot of things are coming out, and I think that's good for our society, and I think it's very, very good for women. And I'm very happy a lot of these things are coming out, and I'm very happy it's being exposed.
Well, tonight, he's not so happy. Rob Porter's alleged abuses are being exposed. He's said to be furious. He's said to be furious at Hope Hicks and John Kelly and Raj Shah. Everyone else he reportedly believes have failed.
Yes, but no, because this is President Trump. I think what he did today was he solidified his legacy as a defender of abusers, especially white abusers, as you just noted in your statements there, Anderson. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. It's sickening. It's not surprising because he has defended abuser after abuser after abuser over the course of time. And this is really, it's about Donald Trump because he leads the White House, but this is the reflection of a morally corrupt White House and a culture that accepts abuse, accepts sexism, accepts masochism as a part of who they are and what they high-five in the hallway. And I think the larger problem here, beyond the politics and how this impacts Donald Trump politically, is that they're sending a message to the public that you can excuse abuse if you have a good resume, if you went to a good school, if you are a good-looking white man, and that's something that is troubling, a troubling message to abusers and to those who are abused who are afraid of speaking out.
Steve, I mean, is there any way to interpret the president's comments today with, at best, insensitivity for the alleged victims of his staff secretary?
Yeah, listen, Anderson, I have to take issue both with your comments and the comments just made. And I say this, by the way, as a brown man, all right, who the president, by the way, has not only treated me incredibly well, but that's really beside the point, has treated my community incredibly well. Hispanic unemployment at all-time lows. This is a man who cares about the prosperity and security of Hispanic Americans, of black Americans. So this idea, this continual notion that's out there in the media that we're going to paint the president as a racist because we'd rather not talk about policy.
I didn't
We'd rather
say
talk
he's a
about
racist.
innuendo. We'd
Right.
rather talk about supposition.
Right.
Well, but implicitly you did. Let's be honest.
He does defend
You
white
did.
abusers.
All right, and
I mean, he does.
okay,
Steve, we're
well, but
talking
again,
about
here I am,
domestic abuse.
here
We're
I
not
am,
talking about his
here
legacy
I am.
on Latino unemployment.
Well, but does unemployment not matter to Latinos? Does our prosperity as a community not matter? I'm not saying that
calling them
abuse doesn't matter as
rapists
well.
and murderers matter. I mean, like, you really want to go down this road to try to defend Trump on this? But go ahead,
That's
Steve.
incredibly unfair, by the way. And
He said it.
This has gone on.
I want you to be able to finish.
This has gone on for a couple years. No, he said some are rapists and murderers.
That's
Are
right.
some people who cross the border illegally rapists and murderers? Of course they are. Of course they are. That's just the reality.
Steve,
are some people who
were
come
you
to the United States
pleased with his
illegally
comments
dangerous?
today in the Oval Office defending Rob Porter and praising Rob Porter and saying nothing either about these women or even about domestic abuse in general?
Well, listen, I think he could have been more explicit. I do. I think he should have been more explicit about the victims of domestic abuse, about how domestic violence is never okay in any circumstances. I also think this, though, and this, please put yourself in his shoes for a moment. He doesn't know Rob Porter in that way. General Kelly didn't know Rob Porter in that way. They knew him in a professional setting where apparently he was exceptional. All of us in our lives have known people who do that, who can be Jekyll and Hyde, who can be in a professional setting wonderful and smart and gregarious and wonderful, and then go home and be a very different person. Apparently Rob Porter was one of those
but
people.
do you
and
need
that
to then
stinks,
go
and
out of
it's
your way?
awful for his-
But do you need to go out of your way to then praise them for their actions in a professional setting? I mean, first of all, he was praising Roger Ailes actually for his actions in a professional setting, which were anything but professional, because of some of the allegations of molestation actually and harassment took place in the office, and Bill O'Reilly as well. So it does seem, and Roy Moore as well, because he was actually, at the time of the allegations, he was a professional. I think he was, the district attorney or assistant district attorney. So he does seem to go out of his way.
I'm assuming, Anderson, I'm assuming, here's the thing, I give the president the benefit of the doubt because I trust him and I know him, and I think when he said it was sad, I think he meant it was sad for everyone. It was sad that this very promising young man...
He said, I've gone over his statements. What he said was it's sad for people at the White House, and that he knows that Rob Porter is really sad as well. He didn't, that was it.
That's right. He showed no empathy whatsoever.
I
for
believe
the
he meant
victims.
that it was sad for everyone. It was sad that these
Let's
women
play it again.
suffered.
Let's play it again. Let's just play it again right here.
It's a obviously tough time for him. He did a very good job when he was in the White House, and we hope he has a wonderful career, and hopefully he will have a great career ahead of him. But it was very sad when we heard about it, and certainly he's also very sad. Now, he also, as you probably know, he says he's innocent. And I think you have to remember that. He said very strongly yesterday that he's innocent. So you'll have to talk to him about that. But we absolutely wish him well.
So, Tara, it was sad when we heard about it, and he's also obviously very sad.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of hymns in there. I didn't hear anything about the victims or she. This is, it's amazing to me how Donald Trump is always the victim. He, in every circumstance, he somehow becomes the victim here. And this is what he didn't know, or it's sad now. And this is nonsense. What he should have said was that, yeah, it's sad that women have to face domestic abuse like this, and if it's true that Rob Porter was this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, then this would have been a teachable moment for the President of the United States to say, here's a perfect example to demonstrate where domestic abusers know no boundaries. It could be a professional in the White House. It could be your next door neighbor. He could have used this as an opportunity to do that, but he's incapable of rising to the occasion. Because you know what he's sad about? He's sad about the fact that it was embarrassing to him that someone he thought played the part so well because of his resume. He went to Harvard. He was a Rhodes Scholar, all of those things. And now this makes him look bad because of how poorly the White House managed the situation.
That's
from
so
Don
unfair.
McGahn down. No, it's the truth. From Don McGahn to General Kelly. And and it sends a message to women that if you have the resume, if you can portray yourself as an upstanding citizen and no one has doesn't know about it, then it's okay.
There is no,
until you get caught with photographs.
This is not a partisan issue. There's no D or R on domestic violence,
of course,
and sexual harassment. There is not. Whether we're talking about Harvey Weinstein or Bill Clinton or Steve Wynn or Rob Porter, okay? 2 Ds, 2 Rs. There is no D or R attached to people who abuse women. And I would say, by the way, all 4 of the people I just named are reprehensible and and terribly abused women and used their positions of power to do so. That's a terrible thing.
Was
this
Roy
is not
Moore
a partisan
reprehensible?
issue.
Is
Let's
Roy Moore
stop trying to make it.
reprehensible?
Yes, yeah. Well,
And so how did you
I
feel
don't know
about
enough of
Donald
the facts
Trump?
there.
How did you
But
get
before I
the
just
truth
named,
just came out
before
that
I
Donald
just
Trump
named,
defended him?
Before I just named, Harvey
how do you
Weinstein,
not know the
Bill
facts?
Clinton,
You know the facts on
Rob
Harvey
Porter,
Weinstein,
Steve
but
Wynn.
you don't know the facts on Roy Moore?
Well, fine. I'll concede that too. I just don't. I haven't looked into that enough. But my point is,
You didn't look
looked
at
at
Roy
Roy
Moore?
Moore?
The allegations against Roy Moore?
there are Republican and Democrat men who have been abusive of their position of power, clearly, to women, and it's reprehensible in every single case, and that's not a partisan issue.
Steve,
and I think when the president said it was
the
sad,
fact
I
that
think
it's
he
not a
meant that it's
partisan
sad on the whole.
issue is exactly why it's confusing why you're defending Donald
That's
Trump's
right.
comments today. Because part of what you just said earlier is that he did his job well, that Rob Porter did his job well, that he was well liked. That's the whole point here.
Exactly.
That abusers look like they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're people in the media, they're people in politics. And when the President of the United States stands out there and tries to justify, as does the Chief of Staff, that this is somebody they look the other way because of that, that's not